Let's go.
Hey, everybody. I'm Matty Staudt, president of Jam Street Media. And every month we like to do a little thing where we talk about something that's going on in podcasting, give some information, hopefully be helpful for podcasters, networks, and other professionals in our industry. At Jam Street Media, we do consulting and production and all kinds of stuff, and I'm sure I'll plug everything later on. Today I wanted to talk about fiction podcasts for a couple reasons. When I was younger and I got into, audio, my parents are older and they like got me into radio drama. And I was like, this is fantastic. Why don't we do this more on the radio? And we didn't. And then in 2008, when I was running content at Stitcher, we went out to find different kinds of content, what was available. And there was not a lot of fiction. And one person was doing fiction then, and we'll talk to him in just a second. But, just more of an overall, talking about fiction and like why it's maybe finally getting the attention it deserves. Let me just bring up the first slide that we have, Isha. So this is, from Acast. But if you look at the growth of what's happening in podcasting, it's very evident that fiction is really going up. And that's been driven by a few things. We got a lot of new people in our industry coming from movies and TV and they have IP that they want to develop. And also, we always talk about how technology drives podcasting. Podcasting's always been pushed by the technology. And I think now that people are really listening to sound and putting on better headphones and, all the little things that fiction podcasters do are being appreciated more. So that's pretty exciting. And then when you look at, a podcast and why it's successful, we'll go to the next slide. The thing that I look at when I look at my podcast and somebody asks me, is it doing well? I don't always reply to that because of the answers. I mean, the downloads. I reply to it based more on time spent listening and listen through rates, because I know that if I have good listen through rates, then I'm doing something right. And if I'm not getting downloads, that means I'm not promoting it well. That's on me. It's not on the content. So when you look at fiction, this is the genre that people really listen to the longest. So, they have over 85% completion rate. I get over 85% completion rate on a podcast. I go crazy nuts because I know it's a home run. So this is an average for fiction podcasts. And then the time spent listening is over 30 minutes. So if you think about content and you can get somebody to spend 30 plus minutes with a show and they're listening to 85% of it, there's something very powerful about that genre. Hence, we are talking about fiction. So I wanted to do this, for me, it's a world that I respect, I like, but I don't know a lot about. We have never done a fiction podcast at Jam Street Media. We consult for a couple companies that do, but we've not made any because there's a lot that goes into it. So I wanted to talk to somebody who is a pro and has been doing this as long as anybody. Christof Laputka has been with, created Leviathon Chronicles in 2008. They were one of the first fiction shows we added to Stitcher. So I've watched this show for almost 15 years grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And Christof is also somebody we work with and is working with our clients as well on their fiction stuff. So Christof, hello, buddy.
Hey, it's great to be here, Matty. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with a little personal history. 2008, I leave radio and get into podcasting, and I am immediately shunned as an idiot. Why in the world did you get into podcasting? And I asked myself the same question for quite a few years because it did take us a long time as an industry to get going. What about this genre and podcasting in 2008 got you to start Leviathon Chronicles?
It's a great question. I mean, just to give your audience some perspective of what podcasting looked like in 2008. I mean, it was a sub tab on part of iTunes to get to. So it didn't have standalone apps. And our challenge back then wasn't how to get people interested in fiction podcasting. It was trying to answer the question, what's a podcast? People just didn't know what it was or how to access it. But the reason why, we had this creative idea of how to create a James Bond meets science fiction universe on a Lord of the Rings scale. How do we do that? And it would have been cost prohibitive to do it, in video. And I was working in New York and going to a job I wasn't that thrilled about, but I was listening to all of these amazing authors that had manuscripts. And this was right at the time when Amazon was becoming ascendant, Barnes and Nobles was shutting down, and the traditional publishing world was on its end. And they weren't taking any first-time authors or only sticking with established writers. And so a lot of these authors were taking like a Charles Dickens approach, where they said, look, this manuscript that I've poured my love and heart into isn't making me any money or doing anything. Why don't I podcast one chapter a week into the internet through podcasting, and then I can go back to these traditional publishing houses with empirical data to say, you said no one would read my book, here's who's listening. And it was really empowering. So I was listening to some of these authors, and what else I liked about it was there was an intimacy between the creator and the audience, where you didn't have to get filtered through a book. Like I'm never going to get Stephen King to respond to my emails, but like you could, the audience had a closer relationship with the author, and that created more engagement, which I think is really what podcasting is about. And so for me personally, I was listening to these stories and I was like, these are wonderful, but there needs to be a gunshot. There should be music swelling when XYZ happens. And it should be more immersive and more cinematic. So we took a vision with Leviathon to really see how cinematic, how immersive we could make our stories. So I hooked up with a company called Silver Sound that focuses on doing audio for television, commercials, film. And they were thrilled to have the opportunity to work in audio without the limitations of video, and could create whatever universe you could using sound. And that having that playground is really what inspired us to launch, and we've been paddling ever since.
Again, a little perspective for everybody. Stitcher in 2008, I'll tell you what the top podcasts were. It was Mac Today, This Week in Tech, all of these very long podcasts about Mac computers and Apple's that were like 2 hours. I mean, that's what the space was. So to have an idea to do this then was, I think I took a big leap going into podcasting back then, but this is even a bigger leap. We're going to talk about how these are made, because this is not for everybody. It's just not, if you want to do these right. How do you get funding then? How do you think about monetization then? Because we had nothing in 2008 for monetization. I mean, really, there was people, when people talk about our industry, I always want to remind them, like, just don't forget, we really started at nothing. So how did you, decide, hey, who's going to pay for this? Because it's expensive.
It is expensive to create, and the cost is a scale. You can spend a lot and spend less, but it's not as we were saying earlier, it's not just buy a couple of USB mics and have a conversation. You need to in doing it have at least 5 scripts finished. If you're doing, most of the series run between 8 and 10 episodes for a season, so you need to have those done before you even get to recording. But back to the monetization question, yeah, it was a challenge, and originally people were using podcasting to try and drive sales of their self-published books. So hey, if you like this, go buy my book on Amazon that I've self-published, and that was getting a little bit of momentum. People were starting to do coupon codes that they were promoting. That was coming in. But again, it wasn't the tools for monetization back in 2008, probably really until 2015 or 16, they just didn't exist. There wasn't an Acast or a Megaphone that can help with programmatic ads. And the universe of advertisers hadn't figured out what podcasting was and how efficient it is for running ads versus radio versus film and television. So that's changed, obviously, but it was a huge challenge in the beginning to pay for all the talent and pay for all the time to create these wonderfully immersive shows.
I'm still amazed that it got done. And at the time there was, We're Alive was out, I think then. Night Vale came along around that time, a little bit later.
Yep.
Other than that, there just wasn't much. And I think it goes to cost and, return on investment, which was, none of us, all of us that made money in podcasting in those first 5, 6, 7 years had to think outside of the box, get into, creating projects, consult. I did everything you can imagine in the field to stay in it. And the cost is prohibitive for some folks. And I want to get into why. So when I decide, hey, I want to make a fiction podcast, what is the process to go into that? And, let's start with just the idea. And how do you know you've got an idea that's going to work? Or, where does that gut come in? Or where does, how many people do you need to hear say, yeah, that's right?
Again, that's a great question. I think it's number one, when you think about it, so if you want to do a fiction podcast, number one is, do you have the idea or do you want to hire a writer to do it? And in my case, I write all the scripts for Leviathon Chronicles and for our new spin-off podcast, the Rapscallion Agency. So that simplifies it. But the next step you have to wonder is, okay, so you've got an idea for an IP or for a story. How's it going to sound? And that's a really important element to understand what your soundscape is going to look like. Like, for instance, a lot of our stuff happens underwater. So, we had to figure out, like, what does underwater sound like? Like, you could do a space drama. Well, sound doesn't travel in space. And
you just went super geek sci-fi person on that. That's one of those science fiction conversations that happen on Reddit. There's no way you couldn't hear that in space. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
I got too scientific, but you have to think about what's going to sound good versus what's going to be a good story. So sci-fi looks great on a screen, but does it sound great to your ears? And you have to really think about what's going to make compelling sound. And the next step is, do you have the ability to create that sound? And what most people in our space do is they're working with either an audio production company or with some of these amazing sound design artists that have the skills and have the sound libraries to bring in all the effects and create it. So, in terms of the process, I think the first step is understanding where you get your core content, writing the scripts. You should have at least 6 to 10 finished scripts done. And then the next step is you start to talk to a sound designer if you don't have those skills yourself, and understand, okay, this is what we want to create. That'll give you a sense of what your cost is going to be, because your biggest cost will probably, if you're starting out, be in sound design, not for talent. Although at the upper levels, certainly talent becomes the largest cost factor when you're talking about people like Q Code and Wondery that are bringing in Hollywood stars. But for somebody trying to get into it and take advantage of that deep engagement that fiction has with their audience, I think the first step is identifying, how do I create a rich soundscape? And from there, I think a lot of the other pieces start to begin to fall together.
When we kind of shift into what's going on today with fiction podcasts, we'll talk about voiceover. And as somebody who spent a lot of time doing voiceover, and you can see me in the movie Cars, by the way, people. Matty. It's funny. I'll hear celebrities do audio drama, and they're not very good at it. It's not. When we work in voiceover, all we're thinking about is how the character comes out of our mouth. And not how we look. And it is a difference. And some get it and some don't. But that's a whole nother conversation. We'll get into that. So you start this thing off immediately. Like, at what point do you have, and I always talk about this. I tell people who start companies, you got to plan for the divorce and hope for the best. What kind of runway did you have? And was there a place where you said, we're going to, if we don't do X, we're going to have to just stop doing this? Like, what was that? What were those mileposts for you over the years?
There are certainly many dark nights of the soul, wondering if we're gonna, if this is all worth it, because it is a lot of work. We have a massive cast for Leviathan. I think we've used over 80 to 90 actors at this point. So it's a lot to manage, and bringing people back after multiple seasons is a challenge. But I think in each season we kind of took a step back and reevaluated. So Leviathan's first season was 25 episodes, and we decided that was too long. I think there were moments where, we had one period when we just couldn't get the material done. We couldn't find the right actors to do certain scenes. And it was probably back in 2015 where we just couldn't get like 4 episodes put together. Like it wasn't right. And we couldn't get the right music. And we're just getting frustrated with like, why can't we make the story come alive? And we had to really kind of step back and figure out, what does our audience want to hear? What are we good at? And I think there's a little bit of trial and error, and we had to kind of refine our formula a little bit. I think initially we were a little bit too expository in what we were doing, and we weren't letting the actors shine. And I think once we started to do that, our downloads started picking up, and we had to experiment a little bit. And there were definitely some moments where we're like, is anybody going to listen to this? Are we just kidding ourselves? But then I think when podcasting got a standalone app, that was what really kind of changed things for us, and it brought so many more people into the space. Fiction podcasting has always been a smaller sector of podcasting, but just like you showed in that slide, it's one of the fastest. It's the fastest sector of podcasting in terms of growth. So it's from what my understanding, it's where true crime, and you think about how massive that sector is. Fiction's where true crime was 2 years ago. And I think what's going to be one of the catalysts that are going to really bring people in is going to be when a serial-like phenomenon hits fiction. And maybe it'll be one of our shows, maybe it'll be somebody else's. But when you really have that like flagpole property where people are talking about it at the water cooler, people were doing that with true crime. They haven't quite gotten there yet in fiction. But I am so confident that somebody's going to have a breakout hit in the next 18 to 24 months.
So let's talk about, where the genre is now. A lot more people into it for different reasons. I've heard the gamut. I've seen podcasts that I know people spent over $1 million on, and they did this crazy soundscape, but the content was trash. And then I hear others like the content's really good, but like they don't have the budgets for all of that. So, how do you see the space right now as far as quality, quantity, and how it can evolve?
I think that the fiction podcasting space, truly is one of the most exciting sectors of podcasting. And I feel like it's where Hollywood was maybe 20 years ago, where there's a mix of independence, of big budget, but there's no, there's not one dominant IP like there is in Hollywood, like with Marvel or with Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. So there's a lot more diversity in terms of the kinds of stories that are being told. But the space is in a really interesting spot right now, because you've got some of the big heavy hitters like Q Code and Wondery that are throwing big budgets at it. They're bringing in Hollywood actors, and their goal is twofold. They, number one, are banking on the idea that if I put a Hollywood star, a John Hamm or a Gina Rodriguez or an Alan Cumming, on the album art, and that they're involved, that's going to naturally bring in their fans to explore the content. And their second play is IP. So a lot of movie studios are saying, listen, I could spend $5 million on a pilot episode that may or may not get made, and bring in all the actors and the production and the crew, or for a fraction of that cost, I could do a 10 season, not a pilot. I could map out a whole season of a show, a whole cohesive chunk of IP, and then market that. and I could do 10 of those for the cost of one pilot. So I think it's a very efficient way of both fleshing out IP and comporting it in a very marketable content. It's easy to distribute. It's easy to listen to a pilot to a finale. So their goal isn't monetization of the podcast itself. It's a goal down the line of both giving their actors an avenue to explore voice acting and also to promote the IP. On our side, on Leviathan, like we're a lot smaller, but we're trying to make our bread and butter through sponsorship and through advertising. So so for us, we have our average show runs about 30 to 40 minutes. So it's like a full hour of television almost. And as we talked about earlier, the listen through rates are so high on fiction. I mean, they're at 85, sometimes 90%. So the quality of the audience and the engagement is much higher than in a talk show. So a lot of advertisers finally discovering that the listeners to fiction podcasts are a passionate audience, and they really follow to where the creators are taking them. So I think that it's been a success story that way.
And it's always been, for the 16 years that I've been in this industry, I always keep coming back to this when I talk to people about, bringing more money in and advertisers is that engagement that podcast listeners have. They care. And for you to start in 2008 and build a community, it wasn't as easy back then. We didn't have Ariel Nissenblatt. We didn't have her telling us how to build community. We didn't have
Right.
a lot of these these strategies that have been built in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
So so it proves out that it's the content the content is listened to by folks that are passionate and adamant about believing in the product that they like. I think, and let me ask you this, and you brought up a good point about IP, and I think, that's true of a lot of the genre now in podcasting. I didn't realize till I moved to LA and I started hanging out with Hollywood people, how expensive it is just to get a script read. Like, you could do a podcast series for just having some dude read a script and tell you if you liked it or not. It's crazy. So,
Yeah.
So why do you think, though, that, we've had Marvel podcasts, we've had some of these, other, brands that do well in movies and haven't really, changed the world in podcasting, but yet shows like yours and Night Vale and, some of these other shows don't have that back. They're just started in this world and have such a rich following. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because certainly of my generation of fiction podcasters, and there's so many newcomers coming in, like everything else, the key to engagement is your audience will know if you're authentic or not. Authenticity is what drives engagement. And so I would say the majority of the small to mid-sized fiction podcasters are all writer, director, creator people like myself. So I have an incredible passion for the world that I've created in Leviathan, the immortals and the underwater cities that are there and how they interact with the mortals on the surface. It's deep in my mind and this desire to create. And I think that comes through the audience. When for some of the larger production, these multi-million-dollar productions, it's usually a different script writer and a different director and different actors coming in. And those are wonderful. I don't want in any way to besmirch them. But I think what helps advertisers and helps and the audience really latch onto is they know that many of these were passion projects that if they've survived, they've grown bigger. And I think these are coming from creators that are passionate about the material and passionate about the medium to get into this crazy sector. So by definition, if you've been able to get it to the finish line and be able to launch a show, your audience can pretty much tell if this is something that is deeply personal. And those are the engagements that you're looking for. And those are the audience that stick with you for 15 years, like we had with Leviathan.
And I will say that, the other thing, I know we're two old white guys talking on this, but in the fiction world, there's so much diversity. I'm working with one of my mentees at Second Chance Studios, which you should all check out, secondchancestudio.org.
Check it out.
And he wants, he's doing black horror fiction. And I'm like, oh, So
It's
good.
great.
And
It's
I'm
great.
so
Especially at
excited.
Halloween. It's great.
I'm so excited to help him with this project. But, when I look at, I dive into communities, I just see such a rich diversity of people making fiction podcasts right now. It really encompasses, again, fiction podcasting to me, the more I've dive into it is it so aligns with just the podcast journey. Going from two white guys with beards talking about Mac computers for 2 hours to where we are today. But fiction is starting to get their serial kickstart maybe a little later, and maybe not even yet. But talk to me about that, and then and then we're going to take questions. So please, if anybody has any questions, please let us know now, because we're going to do some at the end in just a minute. But I do want to know, talk to me about the community of fiction podcast creators and how tight it is.
I was talking with a friend of mine about this a couple weeks ago, and he said it's like fiction podcasting's where the music business was back in the 50s and 60s, where you had Frank Sinatra showing up on Dean Martin's records, and people were just, it wasn't so litigious, and it was really collaborative. And I couldn't tell you how much that's true for fiction podcasting today. There's the community is incredibly supportive. Everybody knows that by helping out your other fellow fiction podcaster, you're growing the pie and making it bigger, because we know that when you bring a new listener into the fiction world, the number one question they go, I consumed it, what's next? Where do I go? People that are listening to fiction want to find another fiction show. It becomes, once you dive into this world, there is so much to explore that we understand that bringing anybody in is going to, float all boats. So it's incredibly, I've never had a podcaster that I've spoken with who have asked for a favor or to be on their show ever say no. It's incredibly supportive, and honestly, that's one of the things that's gotten us to this point where, like you said, it was a desert back in 08 to 15, where there wasn't any monetization and there weren't a lot of tools for distribution, and everybody kind of helped each other out however they could, and that ethos still exists in a really beautiful way. And I always try to make references to other people's podcasts in my shows, not in the notes or the plug at the end. I try to have my characters in the story say, I'm listening to this podcast, and build their shows into the narrative just as an Easter egg, because I think it's important, and there is so much great content out there to explore.
And again, that's our industry. Our industry has thrived because of cooperation, not competition. It's a mantra of mine. It's part of our mission statement at Jam Street Media. And when I see folks come into the industry and they're just about bottom line, making the dollar, getting in and out as fast as they can, and they don't have that ethos, I don't want to work with them. And most people in our industry won't either. I mean, we really have been, I hope it's one thing I'm adamant that we need to stay, because we're still a baby media. We're still, I mean, people are like, oh, it's podcasting. You guys go, there's so much more money going into radio still into radio.
Right.
We haven't gotten any of that yet. I mean, we're starting to, but we'll get more. But it is that whole idea that, like, if we don't help each other, if we tear each other down, we won't grow.
And there's no reason for it. And it's like anything else, it is truly an ecosystem. And when you become part of it, you start launching, you're not an island. You're going to want to, whatever you're going to create, it's going to have relationships with other fiction podcasts. If you're doing horror, then, there's a ton of other great horror podcasts, and your audience is going to put you into, okay, you're like this show and that show. And it's only going to behoove you to have relationships with other horror podcasts and exchange. And for them, you're the new kid on the block. You're going to get a lot of, new energy. So it's important for podcasters to work together, and it benefits everybody. It benefits your audience. It benefits the person you're asking to help, and it benefits you. It really is a great community. It is not easy to create quality fiction podcasts, because as we said, as some of the bigger players come in and they are throwing millions of dollars in, the quality of the soundscapes are going up. So in some ways, the barrier to entry is rising a little bit, but that doesn't mean there's not creative ways to get around it. There's a lot of great tools for audio. And what I want to say at one point is there's a lot of different ways to do it. So if you looked at what we do at Leviathan, we do very heavily processed, cinematic, big bombastic style. They're like Casey Whalen's, you mentioned We're Alive, which is definitely a fiction podcast everybody should create. It's an incredible 100 episodes plus zombie saga. But, Casey gets these great studios where he's got like 10 actors that are all working together. From recording and for radio, sound booths are often like, claustrophobic, Harry Houdini affairs. But when you've got a big sound stage, you can create a chemistry between the actors that really drives the show. And then there's another guy named Fred Greenhall up in Maine who's done some incredible shows of like ElfQuest and Dark Tome, where he goes out in the Maine woods and has all this recording equipment where he goes into storm drains and does all the stuff like on location, Foley and shooting. So there's so many different ways to slice it and to bring your story to life. It doesn't have to be, giant, big budget. It's a fertile ground for a creative mind. And I think that's just great for audience and for advertisers.
And, we'll start. We had a question about that from Dr. Emmy winner, Dr. Richard Hart. Can all the cast and crew work remotely, or is a studio a must?
That's a great question. We use a combination of the two. Remote is going to depend upon your actors. A lot of the voice actors, and I think that universe has grown right now. They'll have their own recording studio in their house, and some are better than others. So if you can absolutely record people's performance. What I will say is that you are creating more work on the back end. And we did this a lot with our early episodes of Leviathan, where we recorded all our actors one by one, mostly remotely or whenever we could get them like to come into the studio in New York. But then you're going to have a lot more work on the back end, doing all the dialogue editing and trying to get everything timed right. So it's easier on the front end, but it's going to be more laborious on the back end. Ideally, I think doing it all in a studio is going to make your life easier, but it's also going to be a higher cost because you got to rent out the studio space and have an audio engineer. But it will make your life easier on the back end, and you have an assurance of quality and everybody's levels, everybody's everybody's performance is going to sound similar. If one guy sounds like he's in an empty room and one guy sounds like he's in a busy room, it becomes difficult to mix the levels so that when you're listening to a cohesive story, it sounds like they're in the same place. So it can be done. You just gotta make sure that everybody's got good equipment.
And I'm going to name drop. Getting to work with John Lasseter, that's one thing I learned, because when you go in the studio with John is running around the room. He is like getting you to do things like it's like a madhouse. And like I did not expect that because I'd done voiceover mostly in booths and things. But boy,
it's kinetic. Like you're like,
no, you
come on, get your voice out, scream.
You become a cartoon character because John Lasseter is a cartoon character. I love him bouncing around the room and all this stuff. But that is definitely the in studio stuff. As much as I love remote because it's easier and I don't have to muck with people getting places at a certain time. I do think in this particular genre, it does behoove you to do a studio. And then one more for Richard. This is a skilled video editor, a good choice for post-production, or is it kind of audio production a unique skill? So that's a good question. We look right now at the landscape of podcasting, and we're all going cross-platform. We're figuring out ways to do video and other things. What is the approach to video with at least your approach, or what have you seen that folks are doing that is groundbreaking or new or interesting?
Yeah, it's definitely been one of the challenges, especially on using social media, which platforms like Instagram and TikTok are inherently visual. They're video mediums, and we're playing in audio. So how do these two coexist and thrive together? So what we did first, we just launched a new show. It's a spinoff of the Leviathon Chronicles called the Rapscallion Agency. Love your listeners to go check it out. And for that, we created 6 videos of one of our characters kind of reading a diary. He's a secret agent in a group we call the Black Door Group, and he's following a suspect through Europe, through different cities, and he's kind of giving a video diary. And we filmed it, so it was kind of like half behind the scenes, half live action and character. And then we were able to post those up on TikTok and Instagram and everywhere else, to kind of help drive attention back to the core show. So I think originally people were creating like podcasts as meta content to support like television and film, and now we're trying to create little videos to help support the podcast itself. But it's a challenge. What I would say is it's very good to invest in your album art. I wouldn't say you need a video editor, but finding a good artist that can create album art that's going to stand out on the charts, and also art that might serve multiple purposes. So you want to create, you can do videos where you create a little Ken Burns effect and play some audio underneath it. And you can do little 60-second clips that then you can put on TikTok and Instagram. That's one way that people do it. Other ways that people use it is they do a lot of behind the scenes footage, and people like seeing that. And when you're doing your production, you should think about it, because it can take you 6 months from when you're recording the actors to when you're releasing. So you've got to be thinking early on, I need to get all this footage, because when I want to start marketing around release, I'm going to want a lot of video and a lot of stills and cast interviews, because you can't just put your album art and play audio and sling it up on Instagram. People won't engage with it because it's not visual enough, and that's not what they're there to. That's not the kind of content that they're to consume. So you've got to kind of meet them where they are.
All right, I think we're gonna do like one more question and then start to wrap it up. This is from William. I'm not going to butcher your last name. What do you think it is, Christof? Since you have an interesting last name.
Goussois?
I'm gonna say Goose. Okay, Billy Goose. What do you think?
Thank you,
Billy Goose. I just made him a kid from West Virginia. Do you think the good Foley, soundscape, and audio effects are currently underutilized in production? I'm a big fan of Foley, and I, for no other reason than I just think it's cool. And talk about good video content. Just watching Foley is amazing. But talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think, first of all, yes, I do think they're underutilized. We kind of went through an evolution in fiction podcasting where most people's experiences were just an audio book or a book on tape that they listened to with no effects. And now we're going to, towards full cinematic audio. Yeah, I do think it's underutilized. I think, but what I think is great now for people that are looking to create their own fiction content is the tools that are available. It used to be like Foley, right? You had to put a pair of shoes on your hands and do. You don't need to do that anymore. Everything's digital. There are incredible sound libraries that are free, or ones that you can pay for that are still cheap. That'll give you, hundreds of thousands of different sound effects that you can utilize. So it doesn't require, that a specialized practical skill to necessarily know. But that being said, I think the way to distinguish yourself in the fiction world is to create a really immersive soundscape, and music is as big a part of it as Foley. And people often, I would say, and I'll make this controversial statement here on your show, that I think it's worth more of your production money on finding a composer. And we have Luke Allen, who's just amazing, to create as many custom music pieces for your show, because that's going to set mood. It informs the listener's emotions more so than gunshots and effects. Those are all important, but having the right music is so transformative for the soundscape and for your listener's experience. So that's my one pro tip of how I would want to make my audio sound more immersive.
And just, I'll throw in there, I teach at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco. We have a sound design department and a music department. And before, when those kids graduated, it was like, well, if you're going to get a job in movies or TV, or that's it. This world of podcasting has really opened up that world for composers and people who like, creating music, to have a place where they can make money and get paid for what they do. Where, if you're a songwriter today trying to make money in the music industry, I have 3 friends that just stopped. It's like, It's not worth their time. Podcasting is really opening up. We talk about, jobs and things, these are all great career paths for folks who maybe didn't think about it, who were just thinking, well, all I can do is make music for movies.
Absolutely. And I think it's, again, this goes into the ethos where everybody helps everybody. And if you're having, if you're trying to launch a new show, whether it's fiction or not, like hooking up with, if you're in any of the major cities, like, somebody who's in a band or something, like, hey, give me a little bit of music and let me plug you. I'll use your song in the background or use it someplace else and give you credit. Like there's, I think a lot of musicians are so eager to have their music put out there that, that it's easy to say yes to. Hey, can I use your song somewhere in my show, and give you credit for it, link you in the show notes. And that's, again, a win-win for everybody. So I think that's one cheap way. Yes. Like there's so many musicians that would love to have their music in whatever world you want to create.
Christof, before we go, plug away. Talk about that new season and what's going on with Leviathon Productions.
Well, we're in a really great spot. That probably the best spot we've ever been in 15 years. We have a new show. It's a spin-off show of Leviathon Chronicles. So please go to Leviathon Chronicles, wherever you get your podcasts, and click subscribe. It's a story about a group of immortals that were living under the ocean in a city called Leviathan. And when a civil war breaks out between the immortals, some group want to stay sequestered beneath the ocean, and the others want to reach the surface. And this is a saga that goes on for 50 episodes. And we just launched a spin-off series called The Rapscallion Agency. It's in the same feed as Leviathon Chronicles, and it's a story of two of its youngest characters, Lisette, who's a cat burglar, and her boyfriend Cluracan, who's a computer hacker, and they moved to Paris to start their own cybersecurity firm. We have about 40, 50 actors, a lot of them French, that contributed to the production, and we're really excited. We're launching on November 1st, but the prologue is available right now on the podcast feed. So check out Leviathon Chronicles or Rapscallion Agency. They're both going to take you to the same feed, and click subscribe. I would love to have you guys listen.
And thank you, Richard, for that comment. Christof, I want you to do me a favor too. I want you to send me links for some of those free resources you talked about. Mm-hmm. So if you're watching, we'll put those links into the comments. And then if you're listening to this as a podcast, which we will eventually be making podcasts out of all of these, we'll put them in the show notes for you. But I think that's very helpful for folks. And we'll put links in for the Leviathon Chronicles as well, and Rapscallion Agency. Christof, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Matty. It is great to be here. And it's great to talk about fiction podcasting. Thanks for giving us the platform.
Oh, anytime. And remember, we do these about once a month. If you've got a topic or something in the professional podcasting industry you'd like to see addressed, reach out, let me know. We'll cover it. If you want to go back and look, we've done ones on setting up a network and all the pitfalls of that, and how to leverage branded content as a network to create monetization for your other shows. So you can check out those, and we'll have another one next month for you. But thanks for tuning in. And now it's time for the shameless plug. All right, James Street Media, that's my company. We make world-class audio. We've got 3 shows we launched last week. Season 3 of Deep Cover, The Real Donnie Brasco. We got Joe Pistone's actual tapes that he carried undercover, and we made them sound wonderful thanks to Quinn, our sound designer. Amazing season. You got to check it out. More too with Marcellus Wiley on the Dan Patrick Network, just recently launched. We're proud of that one. And my heart and soul is with Sloan. She's 15 years old, and she is one of the best hosts I've ever worked with. And she talks to big stars from the NBA. Our Richard Jefferson episode is up now. It's called Sloan Knows. So check that out. But we really do a lot of consulting. That's what I do. So if you've got a network and you're having problems, is your content strategy right? Is your monetization strategy right? Promotional strategy right? Give me a call, or not a call. Hit me up. We'll help you with that. And then we also have this whole roster of folks who are really good at what they do, because I don't know everything about everything. In fact, I know very little about a lot of stuff. So Christof is one. If you're thinking of doing fiction, we can bring in one of those folks to help you out with that as well. But, we're all about making this industry stronger and better, and helping out the independent podcasters out there to really grow and make a living out of this. Hey, there's my information. Don't call me after 9 o'clock, because I'm in bed like most old folks by then. But just go to the website and drop me an email. All right, thank you, Isha, who does these live streams and produces them, does a fantastic job. Thank you so much, Isha. And then just thanks for everybody that's watching this either live or recorded. I hope you got something out of it. And if there's follow-up questions, just let us know. And I'm sure Christof and I will get to them. More Christof, because he knows what he's talking about with this stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody.